I'm Suzanne Borden, Moment Magazine's Moment Live producer. We're delighted to welcome you to this year's special literary event celebrating our Moment Magazine Karma Foundation Short Fiction Contest winners. And we thank you for joining us for our conversation, Not Your Father's Jewish Mother, with this year's contest judge, award-winning author Rebecca Goldstein, her daughter and fellow author Yael Goldstein-Love, along with Moment book and opinion editor Amy E. Schwartz. First, we want to thank award-winning Broadway producer Sharon Karmazin, a member of Moment's advisory board and president of the Karma Foundation, which makes this contest possible. The Moment Magazine Karma Foundation Short Fiction Contest serves to jumpstart or further its winners' writing and publishing careers. We are pleased that over the years, many of the winners have gone on to publish short stories, anthologies, and novels, with their work appearing in the New York Times, The Atlantic, Tablet, Haaretz, Plowshares, and Tikkun, among many other publications. These writers have won prestigious fellowships and all kinds of awards. So again, thank you to Sharon. We could not do this work without you. Moment has published a wonderful collection of some of these award-winning stories in the ebook Good Karma. You can access this ebook from the shop page on Moment's website. And we urge all writers out there to enter this year's short fiction contest. The deadline for submission is November 1st, and you can learn more about it on our website at momentmag.com. Before we begin today's conversation with Rebecca and Yael, we are excited to celebrate the winners of the 2023 Moment Magazine Karma Foundation Short Fiction Contest. Our first place winner is Ralph Levinson from the United Kingdom, and second place was a tie. The winners are Talia Blatt, who is currently living in Glasgow, Scotland, and Michael Orbach from New York. Last week, our winners had the chance to sit down with Moment editor Sarah Brieger to talk about their stories and their writing process, as well as the Jewish writers that inspire them. Today, we will share short excerpts from each conversation, and the full interviews can be found on Moment's website at momentmag.com. It is my pleasure to invite this year's contest judge, Rebecca Goldstein, to introduce our writers. Rebecca?
And yes, it's my great pleasure to introduce this year's winners. Great deal of fun reading them and look forward to reading more from them. Sounds Turtle Make by Michael Orbach is a convincing close-up portrait of a person who has faithfully sleepwalked through his life. The emphasis here on faithfully, since he's allowed a religious rigidity to take the place of experiencing life and submitting to the demands of love, only to wake up from his sleep when it's too late. In a way, it's an Orthodox Jewish spin on Henry James's wonderful short story, The Beast in the Jungle. Congratulations, Michael.
Hi, Michael. First of all, congratulations for being one of the winners of our Karma Fiction Short Story Contest.
Thank you so much. It's quite an honor. It's delightful to have been chosen, and I've worked in the past with Moment, so it's especially exciting to be back with you guys. I'm obviously a big fan of the magazine and the history, and of course, a huge fan of Rebecca Goldstein. I grew up Orthodox, though, so 36 Arguments for the Existence of God was actually a really powerful book for me, especially even the appendix, which had all of the arguments that a lot of religious Jews use to prove God and kind of the counter arguments there.
Speaking of growing up Orthodox, could you tell me a little bit about how you came up with the idea for this story in particular?
It actually started with a memory. When I was growing up, my mother would cover her hair, and I would always see these like shaitels placed by the window. And I sort of just wondered about that and wonder what it'd be like to see that and think about someone who's no longer there. And that's where the idea sort of came from. And the idea of I was working on a collection of I was working on an interconnected collection of short stories that all had to do with scandalous memoir being a fictional scandalous memoir being published in the Orthodox community and the reactions everyone had to this. So the rabbi was a character in the reactions, and I wanted to sort of write a story about him. And initially, I have very complicated feelings towards my own Orthodox childhood. Initially, it was going to be a much meaner story. I think like it was going to have like a ha salacious ending. And then as I was writing it, I sort of felt more and more compassion for the character and this sort of, I guess, idea that as much as we try in life, religious or not religious, we're bound to fail, and sort of hope we can find forgiveness for our failures.
Who are some of the writers, either contemporary or from the past that you look to when you're writing for inspiration?
Yeah, the authors who I learned from, I mean, obviously Philip Roth is sort of in every Jewish writer's like bookcase. Um, Nathan Englander is also a very important figure. If I want to head back to other Jewish writers, I mean, Isaac Babel is sort of the end all be all of Jewish writers. Cynthia Ozick, I was just looking through my closet, through my bookcase, and I saw her The Pagan Rabbi collection, which is just like, talk about perfection of a Jewish short story. It's there. Like, that's like the best short story. You should just give up after reading that. Um, I have a collection of I.B. Parrott stories that I'm always sort of leafing through. These are important writers to me, and I do want to, like, if I can, just mention a writer who I just read that I'm actually really impressed with. Ruvain Fenton just published a book called Goyhood, which I thought was really enjoyable, and he describes the Orthodox world really well, and I kind of felt a little pang of envy, just at how well he did it. Tova Mervis is another writer whose work I follow, Allegra Goodman. I think if you look at the list of former judges from Moment Magazine's Karma Short Fiction, you'll find out all the people who have idolized and been desperate to follow and ape, and have aped. I don't know how successfully, of course.
Well, thank you, Michael, for taking the time to talk to us, and congratulations again.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It was always good talking with you.
Good talking with you.
Our next winner is Talia Blott, Overnight Shift. And interestingly, it's also about a protagonist who's enshrouded in a fog. She's full of good intentions to do right in the world, but still she's not paying the attention required to fully do right to others. And something I particularly admired about this story was the way that the author was able to create the reality of so many vivid characters. Sort of the story is crowded with these very vivid, alive characters, and the irony, at least I felt that's what she was up to. The irony is that although the reader feels the vivacity of the life surrounding the main character, somehow the character herself is solipsistically removed and closed in her own insecurities, and so she doesn't really experience the full reality of the characters around her. I felt that the irony at the heart of the story was extremely well done. So congratulations, Talia.
Hi, Talia. Congratulations on being one of the winners of this year's contest. I really enjoyed your piece.
Thank you so much. I'm very honored.
Could you tell me a little bit about how you came up with the idea for the story?
So the piece Overnight Shift is about an overnight shift at a homeless shelter. And perhaps unsurprisingly, I worked the overnight shift at a homeless shelter in undergrad, first as a volunteer and then eventually as a supervisor and director. And I think a lot of the questions that work prompted about how we relate to suffering, how taking care of people does or doesn't engender intimacy, and just sort of what to do in the face of both injustice and farce, to me could only be explored in fiction, and especially kind of Jewish fiction. So I think that was the most direct influence probably. And then I was also taking a number of comparative religion courses at the time, looking at how different traditions sort of explored that set of questions. And through that, I came across the philosophy of Simone Weil and her kind of theory of attention and attention as prayer. And so I think that's also kind of the influence on the story.
Do a lot of your stories have Jewish themes?
I was thinking about this one work by Allegra Goodman, where it's set kind of post climate apocalypse, and none of the characters are Jewish because there's no acknowledged religions in this world. And yet a lot of the questions and a lot of the characters just felt very Jewish to me. And I think when I look at stuff I've written, I feel similarly, where even if it's not, there aren't explicitly Jewish characters, there's a sort of Jewish sense of humor. There's a interest in learning and argument that feels Jewish. And then I think often I like to write in conversation with whatever historians or philosophers I'm reading, and those tend to be Jewish. So I was really into like Walter Benjamin my senior year of college. And so I wrote some short fiction that had a lot of Benjaminian vibes. And similarly with, Simone Weil, that she kind of crops up, and that feels Jewish, even if I'm not, writing something set in a shtetl.
Are you working on any stories now?
Yes. So I've been living in Glasgow working as a stained glass artist, and I'm working on the moment a stained glass piece for a shoal here. And I've been living kind of on and off with this group of modern Orthodox Jews in Scotland. And it's both the stained glass pieces of that and the sort of really lovely and fascinating diaspora community have been really generative. So I'm, working is a generous term for what I'm doing, but I'm exploring either a set of short stories or a novel kind of inspired by that setting and the work that I'm doing.
Well, thank you for taking the time to talk to me, and congratulations again, Talia.
Thank you so much. Great.
And now we come to The Laugh by Ralph Levinson. From the first paragraph, there was this palpable atmosphere of mystery that descended, and it is sustained until the very end, which is no mean feat. Ralph never allows the pieces of a story to entirely come together, which is something I particularly appreciated. In fact, the writer subtly draws attention to the refusal to do so, to give us any neat, coherent solution. This writer is not about to be pushed into any easy answers, and knows exactly where to let the impenetrable silence fall so that an ultimate coherence is at once both affirmed and denied. I felt that this is a writer who truly knows what they're up to. Congratulations, Ralph.
Hi, Ralph. Thank you for joining us, and congratulations on winning this year's contest.
Thank you, Sarah. It's a great privilege and pleasure to be here.
Can you tell me a little bit about your story and where the idea for the story came from?
Yes. The story came from, I suppose, very loosely, some events in my own life. But it was sparked off by reading, and I find everything I write is normally sparked off by reading books, reading novels, reading poetry, that kind of thing. So I'd read The Unconsoled by Kazuo Ishiguro, which isn't his most famous book. But when I read it, a whole series of images and past histories came to my mind. For some reason, it was like doing jazz riffs on a piano. You're playing various themes, and then suddenly they come together, and you've hit something which is, which works for you.
Do most of your stories have Jewish themes?
Yes, most of them have. I was brought up, Jewishness or Judaism in a way is very central to me. I was brought up in an Orthodox Jewish family. I'm not a believer myself. I'm totally religious, really. But that had a huge influence on me. And many of my friends are Jewish, and we talk in certain ways amongst Jewish friends which are kind of, work for me in a way that's quite different when I'm talking to others. And so Jewish culture is a part of my life, and it is central to me. And I guess it's a way in which I see the world. And I can't see the world anywhere else, because that was my background, that was my upbringing. But I think not all. I think most of my stories are about Jewish themes, and they're often about my dad, who was born in Lithuania. He was a Litvak, and he was middle-aged when I was born. He came over before the war, and his family were all murdered. But I always think, because I grew up really in the 1960s, and my dad was quite old-fashioned, this old-fashioned country litvak from a shtetl, there's always been a gap between us, and yet I adored him, but I've always been trying to understand him. And I think a lot of my writing stems from trying to get my dad. Who was he?
Do you have any advice for writers who are starting out in their careers?
Yes, my advice is don't take advice. So I think, I mean, I belong to a writing room, to a writing group, and I find it really helpful. Um, there are a lot of institutions that, one can join to help you write and so on. And there are things like show, not tell. And, sometimes you have to tell. I mean, it's so I just think just write what works for you. And I think the most important thing is read. Reading is the source for me of so much. And it doesn't matter what you read, but it spins off ideas. Rather, I was like saying before, like an artist mixing colors or a musician working with different themes, things will happen. And so I would say the most important thing, if you want to write, is read.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me, and congratulations again.
Thank you, Sarah. Right. It's been a pleasure.
Here.
Congratulations again to Ralph Levinson, Talia Blatt, and Michael Orbach for winning the 2023 Moment Magazine Karma Foundation Short Fiction Contest. Our winners' full interviews and stories can be found on momentmag.com. And thank you to Rebecca Goldstein for serving as this year's guest judge. Also, thank you to everyone who submitted stories. And a reminder that this year's submission deadline is November 1st, 2024. So start getting those stories in. And now it is time for today's special conversation, Not Your Father's Jewish Mother. It is my pleasure to introduce our guest. Rebecca Neuberger Goldstein is a philosopher and novelist. She is the author of 11 books, including Plato epic Googleplex, Why Philosophy Won't Go Away. Her last novel was 36 Arguments for the Existence of God, a work of fiction. The recipient of numerous awards for fiction and scholarship, Rebecca received the National Medal of the Humanities in 2015. Yael Goldstein-Love is the author of the novels The Possibilities and Overture. Yael also practices psychotherapy. Amy E. Schwartz is Moment Magazine's opinion and book editor, as well as editor of the magazine's popular Ask the Rabbi section. Amy is the editor of the book Can Robots Be Jewish? And Other Pressing Questions of Modern Life. Please welcome Rebecca Goldstein, Yael Goldstein-Love, and Amy E. Schwartz.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. And thank you, Rebecca and Yael, for being here. And particularly for generously granting your time to judge the contest. And thanks to everyone who's turned up online to take part in this conversation. So we called this conversation Not Your Father's Jewish Mother. Aside from just that I like the way it sounded, I have the feeling that in recent novels about motherhood, and notably yours, Yael, but others as well, we're seeing something genuinely new under the sun. When I was in school studying literature, everyone was talking about the anxiety of influence, the burden of the past, how impossible it was for the young novelist to say anything that hadn't already been said a million times. But then along comes a generation, or maybe a couple of generations of female novelists who feel free to really write about the experience of giving birth and about parenting a young child. And it feels new. It doesn't feel like stories that have been told. So let me start with you, Yael, and ask you, when you were writing your new novel, not so new, I guess, last year's novel, The Possibilities, about which this is for the audience, I just cannot say enough good things about this novel. I have pressed it on everyone I know. But did you feel as if you were in unmapped territory? And if so, like, what was new about it?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. I mean, I have to say, I'm gonna start this answer as a psychotherapist rather than a novelist, and then come back to the novel, back in my way into it, because as we're speaking about the anxiety of influence, I almost forgotten about that's a concern. And what I was thinking about is, what if funny thing that is that we worry about, that everyone feels like, do I have something new to say? Do I have something new? And what I was thinking was, as a psychotherapist, every time I'm with a new patient, I start to think like, oh, you're hearing what's bringing someone in. You're like, oh, this person is like this, or like this, or they're in this category of kind of person I've met, or they're like these. And there always comes a point, sometime in the first few months where I have the thought, oh, I've never met this mind before. I've never met a mind like this. And I think that, when it comes to fiction, we're never going to rewrite the same things because we're writing from our souls, from our minds. And those are all just so unique. I mean, they don't repeat. There are no repetitions in human souls. So in that sense, yes, always. And then to get more specific to the motherhood thing, yeah, I mean, I really had this feeling. So when I was a new mother, I had a really tough birth and then a really tough postpartum experience. And I was sort of desperate to read something that reflected what I was experiencing. The outsized, I mean, it seemed like one of the richest and strangest experiences not one of, the richest and strangest experience I personally had ever had. And then I would read things and they seemed to fall on one of two sides. Like either they were sort of these like, motherhood is so beautiful and here's how great it is. And it's like motherhood is the worst. Like, is it wine o'clock yet? It's all, like that kind. And I was like, well, actually what I think is fascinating about this experience to me is the interweaving and how the joy and the terror, the difficulty, the rage, the love, they're all of a piece and they can't be torn apart like that. It's the ambivalence, the heightened ambivalence of every moment that makes motherhood so fascinating and rich and stirs up all the psychological sediment. And I really wanted to capture that. And as you pointed out, I mean, I think, I felt like I was doing something brand new in doing that. And then there actually are, there's been this recent slate, slate. I know it's gonna, but anyway, there's been this recent
I don't know.
of books that do that. And it's very exciting to feel like, oh, without knowing it, I was part of this movement and this spontaneous thing that's happening.
Interesting. So interesting. Yeah.
Well, just to pursue that, well, let me wait on that. But let me go to you, Rebecca, and you're as the mother in this mother-daughter dyad that comes up a lot in Yael's book. You've also written about mothers among much else. It maybe isn't your primary focus, but more from the perspective of daughters. Is that the same story, or do you feel as if it's a completely different story that you tell about mothers and daughters?
I mean, the thing that strikes me is that when I first started writing fiction, and in fact, I never set out to write fiction. I should say I was trained as an analytic philosopher. That's what I was doing. I was very young. There were very, very few women at the time. So I felt constantly, well, I was always the only woman in the room. So I was always having to prove myself. But I also desperately wanted a child. And none of the women philosophers I knew had children. None of the generation before me. And I remember my chair, who was a woman, chair of my department, said, and I had been married 9 years when I had Yael. And she said, well, I knew you were planning to have a child, but I didn't think you were going to do it so soon. Like,
oh, no.
So
pre-tenure, does that mean? Or
yes, it was pre-tenure, yes.
There you go.
I had married Yael's father very young, but was not, I was going to do what I needed to do in spite of motherhood.
In spite of motherhood, yeah.
Motherhood and to prove to everybody. I mean, it was already, I had to prove to everybody I could be I did a very technical kind of philosophy of science, philosophy of math. And not the soft existentialist stuff and that sort of thing. No, it had to be hardcore. I can do anything a man can do. And then, I had you. And but it was also, very much, so it would never have occurred to me to treat motherhood itself as intellectually rich, as fascinating, as heroic, as a topic to be explored.
Mhm.
And so it's I don't know. It was so interesting to me to read first Yael's first novel, which was also about motherhood, and then this novel where she brings all the richness, quantum mechanics, the multiple
Yes, exactly. There's a lot of math. Yeah.
everything, right? That
Yeah.
she didn't have to prove that she has the intellectual standing to take these things on, and she's bringing it to motherhood.
Mhm, mhm.
This is just to me, just as someone who cares so much about literature, it's such an opening up in so many ways of no, I'm not going to accomplish in spite of being a woman and despite my being a woman or despite motherhood. This is an experience fully worthy of exploration. This is something so fascinating to me.
I mean, I almost think we were talking about this sort of, we were talking all three of
Right.
us, and I read your wonderful piece as well, sort of
Oh,
exploring,
thank you. Yeah.
and I thought it was wonderful, and we're talking about, in some ways, this feels taking on motherhood as something worthy of art, worthy of play and creativity and intellectual gymnastics. Seems to me like a next stage in feminism, in the sense that it's like, what is at the root of misogyny? What is at the root of sexism? So much of it is this sort of our all mother, women and men both needing to separate from our mothers to come into our own individuality against the backdrop of our mothers. And so you have to put the mother down. Ew, it's gross. Ew, it's overwhelming. It's it's all the bad things.
That's
And
Freud,
so,
Freud, right? Yeah.
well, I mean,
Well, Simone
Little.
de Beauvoir,
Yeah.
the way she writes it,
Sure.
the itchiness, the stickiness, the liquidity.
it's like the fluid, the breast milk, the
Exactly,
fluids,
yeah.
that's the world.
Messy.
The mother's body is the thing we separate from. And so I think that the idea that, like, okay, we've come so far, now we can go to the final terrain, the mother's body, the mother's mind, the mother's self. And this can be worthy of, of as much, serious exploration as like men going to war, like, any of these other things that have spawned many, many, many works of literature.
Exactly. Yes.
That's great. Yeah, well, but that's very interesting. I think it's fascinating in the context. You mentioned men going to war, but Rebecca, you said something about motherhood being, you could write about it as heroic, and of course you're quoting from Yael's novel, in which there's a side reference, we never see it directly, where the protagonist's agent or editor says, "I'm still waiting for that book about motherhood as hero quest that you promised me." And that's what she's on. She's on a hero quest across the universe, really, to save her child, kind of like Meg Murray in Wrinkle in Time, in a way, which is another, seminal, I guess, text for our generation. But I want to read you. I want to throw a quote at you. Like, when we talked in preparation for this, we were swapping book titles, and you mentioned a book called Matrescence, which is not a novel, but is a work of I guess, not criticism, a nonfiction work about. And you said, "Oh, that sort of started this whole thing." I found a wonderful quote, and I'm very indebted to you for the recommendation of such an interesting read. So here's a quote. Let's see if it picks up from what you were saying. Quote, and apologies to all for the language, of which there is a little bit. So, quote, "I thought early motherhood would be gentle, beatific, pacific, tranquil, bathed in soft light. But actually it was hardcore, edgy, gnarly. It wasn't pale pink. It was brown of shit and red of blood. And it was the most political experience of my life, rife with conflict, domination, drama, struggle, and power." So does that resonate for both of you?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. For you, though, I'm curious.
I'm taking it.
We'll give you time.
The rosy glow of motherhood, right? Like for you, I think it was more soft palettes.
It's not that it can't be, of course.
Yeah, I think perhaps it was. I mean, it was kind of I think it was my refuge from the hard battles
Mhm, mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I I think, well, I mean, I'm very much a loner. I mean, an extreme loner. And my children were the first people I felt completely comfortable with, I would say.
Oh,
Yes.
that's nice.
Still do. I feel very comfortable with my children. So
And when we talked before, you started out saying, "Oh, I never wrote about motherhood," and then when
my
you were
daughter,
thinking about
yes, I did. Yes.
right, then you were thinking about your the other works. I'm thinking about a book, not one of the ones you mentioned, but I'm thinking about a book that you wrote. I might be remembering it slightly wrong, The Late Summer Passion of a Woman of Mind, in which it's almost about sort of thwarted motherhood because the protagonist, this brilliant older woman, she ends up falling in love with her much younger student, and it's kind of a Death in Venice thing, but it's also when I thought about it, maybe it has a little bit about motherhood in there.
That is interesting. Yes. Yes, as I had mentioned, my the generation before me, the very few women philosophers who there were, they had all foregone motherhood and were most unsympathetic
Mm,
to my attempt to do both things. And I think I was very, yeah, my protagonist there was one of these sort of hardened, she had put a lot to the side, and she also came from her family was something quite horrific too, and she'd put everything to the side, and it was reine Vernunft, pure reason all the way, which had been my original plan in life too, and and what cracked it up was motherhood, really. But oh, and I did want to mention, I would never have written a novel, my first novel, had I not become a mother. That is, yes, it
oh,
just,
that's interesting.
yes, it just completely opened up um some new channel for me of playfulness and of a sharp turn away from reine Vernunft, from pure reason, and so yeah, I mean, every time when people would interview me and say, they're so worried to have a child, is it going to, cramp their creativity? And it was like I discovered this entire new source of creativity by
Mhm.
emotions.
Yeah.
Emotions.
Right.
So, but yes, back to that. Yeah, so I think I was, the road that I had thought I was going to take, of this pure philosopher. Um, and yeah, and she's old, she's too old now to have children. And yeah, she falls madly head over uh, yeah, madly in love with this young student, a totally inappropriate and irrational. um, but
Right.
wow, I think you're right. I think I had forgotten about the source of that novel.
Just a thought. Well, that's interesting. So just speaking for myself, and I mean, we talked one thing to go back to, Yael, what you said about motherhood calling for sort of the full range of imagination and creativity. One of the things that I found most striking about your novel and some other novels, it's the theme of that essay you mentioned, is that you use supernatural or at least non-realist elements, that somehow this experience is so big that you can't write about it with just realism, that it somehow breaks the bounds of realist fiction. Um, is that something you were doing on purpose? I mean, is that the
I mean, I think, I very much so. I mean, one could say that it's so big. I mean, I think that maybe another way to say it, or how I was thinking about it, was more that it's so, in some sense, motherhood is so familiar, right? We all know it from the other side if things go well and we get mothered. Um, so we all think we know it. It's sort of a cliche. Every little detail of it is a cliche, and we think it's familiar and we think we know it. So to write about motherhood, to write about the the kind of trippiness of it, the psychological craziness of the experience. You need to break through the cliches. You need to break through the familiar. You need to get it to be seen anew, to get it to be seen, because we all, it's like, I mean, it's almost as though we've all seen this play from one point of view character, and it's the most important play because we've been that child. And now to write about it, we need to get you to see it from the other point of view character. That's a very hard thing to do. You have to do something to sort of break through the familiar. And so I think the sort of bringing in the supernatural, bringing in the surreal, making it huge and surprising, is one way to do that. And that was part of the motivation there. I mean, for me personally, the other motivation was simply that I could not figure out how to explain to anybody what I was going through. The beginning of my novel, where the child almost dies and is sort of hanging between life and death, that was my birth. That is the most autobiographical thing I've ever written, is that birth scene. And so I had a very difficult postpartum experience where I really felt as though I was living two realities at once. I had the reality where I had this healthy, happy baby at home. We're in this cozy nursery. And then very, very close was this other reality, this reality in which he had died. And I didn't know how to explain to people that that reality was too close. And it was interfering in my own reality, my own psychological reality. And it was when I sort of hit on this metaphor, this sort of sci-fi metaphor, that I was like, aha, this is how I can explain it to people. And so for me, it was just like, this was the reality. This was how to capture the reality of my psychological experience. And then I found out from talking to a lot of other mothers going through similar things that this was not, it captured something of a lot of people's psychological experience of motherhood. And so it felt like a good way to get at this.
Right. You know, just for readers, can you say a little bit about what that supernatural content was? Or
oh yes, that is very helpful.
Yeah, sorry. I could do it, but you'd probably do it better.
So I mean, so the sci-fi metaphor that I hit upon was this idea that at the moment of birth, something changes in the physical laws of reality. As it should, I think. It just seems crazy that nothing changes at that moment of birth. And for a brief moment after birth, all the way things could have gone, all the parallel worlds, the borders between them are more porous than they usually are. And in this new, hive of possibilities, of possible worlds that comes into the world with a new life, a new consciousness, different lines of possibility can merge and overwhelm each other. And so it was sort of this way to capture how fragile and tentative things can feel in a child's life, in a child's existence early on, and this feeling of like all these ways things could have gone, like, your child almost slipped into the ducky bath, but they didn't. Your child almost fell off the changing table, but they didn't. And yet that other reality feels, for a new parent, so close, so terrifyingly close. This was sort of supposed to be the sci-fi underpinning of why it feels that way.
So the mother in this story, just to clarify and to encourage other people who haven't read this book to read it, is she actually begins skipping between quantum universes. She's in at certain stages, she finds herself slipping over into that alternate reality where her baby died, and then slipping into yet another reality where something else changed, and she develops this ability. And it's just, as you said, it turns out that's actually a very clear description of how it actually feels. So even though it's I guess technically it's a non-realist thing. Rebecca, I'm sorry, you were going to say something and I interrupted you.
No. Yes, in your very excellent essay on these mother books, this new wave of mother books, you had quoted a rabbi, I believe, who had 5 boys, did you say? And asked her what that had been like, and she said, I don't remember a thing about it. And that's another aspect of it. I mean, you do this thing, you create a person, there's something that will be a person growing inside your body, and then you're nurturing this new person with your body. This is it's such a, well, especially maybe it was more pronounced with me because I lived so much in my head and not in my body. And then when it was over, I thought, did I do that? I mean,
Right. I did what?
such an alternate reality, and yet when you're in it, it feels nothing feels more natural,
Yeah.
right? Than this thing. And so there's also that aspect of trying to do justice to this immense experience
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
a person.
Yeah.
Of
And not just another person coming. I mean, I think there's another part to it too, which is it's not just another. I mean, as you're talking about like what your body, your body created this other human, but it doesn't stop there, right? I think the sort of the existential strangeness, then you are lending your whole mind, yourself, to creating this other mind.
It's amazing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean, the psychologist Winnicott, writes about this with much insight. That there's a mania of maternal mania. You are so focused on the entire world fades away, and there you are, this, in this dyadic experience that is so
Yeah.
can break through, and when your erotic passion is, yes, that's also very, very thick, and but this is something even thicker, that not it's
For some people, I mean, for
the way I had experienced, yeah,
too, but I think
Yeah.
that's, I mean, it's like it's thick, it's big, but I think that I'm thinking back to the quote that you had read from Matrescence, which I love that book as
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
and I recommended it, but I'm thinking about her saying like I never felt so political, and that's why I'm like, well, did I feel that? I can't remember. To me, I feel like I had never felt so human. I think you had never
Right.
felt so embodied. I think for everyone, it's like there's something about it. It calls for so much of us.
Yeah.
But what it's going to call for, whether it's going to be thick, whether you're going to be in that, nothing else.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's infinite. There's an infinite
Yeah.
variety of experiences. And
Yeah.
I think to me, that's the other thing that's so exciting about that. This is a trend now of writing about these pieces. I had a couple of interviews in which I was asked the question, were you worried coming out with this book? Because there have been these recent motherhood books, these other recent motherhoods. And I thought that was one of the people said, aren't you worried the market is glutted?
Oh,
And to
as if
me, I'm like, this is one of the biggest human experiences there is. We all are produced from it. There is an infinite variety of ways one can experience it. It will never be glutted. I mean,
That's
would
right.
ask like, are you worried that romance, like stories about like couples coming together is glutted? No, because there's no such thing.
It's like we already hired a woman. Yeah.
That's exactly.
Yeah.
We hired the
Yeah.
mom. We have the mom book. Yeah.
Well, another line in your book that sticks in my mind, and I think it captures this sort of question about this dissolving dyad, is you describe breastfeeding as sort of simultaneously soothing and annihilating, which I think that's a very interesting, that too has this kind of double valence, it's and so let's take a step back and talk about stereotypes. I mean, again, I sort of pegged this to the Jewish mother just because, hey, Moment's a Jewish magazine, and a lot of these characters in the books are in fact Jewish. But it's also the case that the Jewish stereotype of the Jewish mother is very different from some other stereotypes of motherhood that are out there. The invisible angel, or the angel in the house, and all these things. The Jewish mother stereotypes a real scary person, strong, but terrifying, and maybe overly wrapped up in her, the Philip Roth mother. So I'm curious if were you working against that or with it in any way? And second question is is there anything in that stereotype that we want to reclaim or hang on to?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think there are several Jewish mother stereotypes that sometimes can come together and sometimes not. I think one is sort of the over-involved, smothering, living out her ambitions through the child. That's sort of the Sophie Portnoy. And then there also is the over-anxious, the worried Jewish mother, the Jewish mother who controls you with her anxiety. And I was really trying to I was working with and against both of those. I mean, I really liked, especially the worried Jewish mother, the idea that that you're, that this thing that nature has endowed the mother with, the new mother with, to be hyper vigilant for dangers to her child, and beautifully reorders her mind to do so. That gets used against us, and that gets used against Jewish mothers in particular, because that's sort of that's the cliche of the Jewish mother. I mean, I really wanted to work against that, but I think also, the too strong, the too overwhelming, the too competent. I mean, that's in there as well, with the sort of the hero. I mean, I have a theory that in much the same way that Jews in general are often the sort of moral scapegoat, or the sort of projection screen for a lot of things that the culture doesn't want to own in itself. Jewish mothers are sort of the mothers in that way. So it's like everything that we don't like in ourselves as humans in our culture are a dependency on other humans, that we are interdependent creatures. We are not independent creatures, that we are incredibly vulnerable, and terrible things could in fact happen at any moment. We don't like to think about that. And so we give all of that to the Jewish mother. That becomes her whole self. And then we, once again, can separate against that. I don't want to be that projection screen. I don't think it's good for mothers. I don't think it's good for the children they raise, to buy into those stereotypes, to have those stereotypes put down our throats. I don't think it's good for the adults that arise out of that. So I really do like to, at every opportunity I have when talking about motherhood, to encourage people to really be aware of how these stereotypes are playing in their own minds. I mean, and I can say that for myself, anytime I start getting very worried, or I'm not sure whether to worry about something, am I being irrational about this worry? In my mind, there's this contemptuous voice that can come and say, stop being such a Jewish mother. And I really have tried to sort of distance from that. Be like, where does that come from? I mean, that's not helpful. From me.
Right.
Not from you at all. You're in fact okay.
Did you think of yourself as a Jewish mother, Rebecca, ever?
What was that?
Did you think of yourself as a Jewish mother? Or was that not, when you were mothering?
The Jewish mother was, well, I'm a worrier. Yes.
We have a question in the chat. I was going to go to some questions later, but this one seems apropos, where someone says, weren't the old, Jewish mothers, our father's Jewish mothers, etc., weren't they all in with the mothering experience in kind of the way you're describing? Is there? So maybe that's a partial answer to the question of whether we keep something.
That they were all in, that they were
that they were totally absorbed by the experience of motherhood,
Yes.
Actually, I think we have everything in the sense that, I think that what we want to reject is the idea that this is a bad stereotype, right? Like everything that's being described about the cliches of the Jewish mother, they're true. Those are aspects of motherhood. There is great anxiety. There is great rage. There is this need to separate, to remind yourself hey, I'm trying to live things out through this person. This is a whole other person. All of that is real. And that's part of what makes motherhood such a rich, emotional, and intellectual experience. So why reject any of it? All I reject is saying that there's something bad about it.
I like that. Okay. That makes sense. And it sounds like, both of you have written in different ways, I feel like, about this, the conflict, if it's a conflict between being a mothering being and being an intellectual being, being a person with a career, and you've got in a different way, Rebecca, the mind-body problem, that first novel, you're a person with a body, but you're also a person with a mind, Yael, that first novel you wrote is all about that, right?
Yes, Yael was in fact a toddler when I wrote that. Yes, making it very difficult to write.
That's so interesting. I had always, at the time, I was a student when that came out, and I thought you had, you said in interviews that, you were procrastinating on your philosophy dissertation, which I guess is.
Oh no, I was already
you were already well out. Yeah.
Story that is.
What's that?
That was when you started reading novels seriously, is when you were
Ah,
writing on your dissertation.
That's correct. Yes.
okay. I'm remembering it wrong. I apologize.
Novels was my
Um,
off time. Yes,
yeah.
that's right. Yes.
So,
mention one other book in this context because it keeps coming into my mind and especially in sort of this schism between like, do you take, there's the serious stuff and then there's motherhood and they might be in conflict. There's this wonderful book that came out a few months ago called When We Care by Alyssa Strauss. It's a very Jewish book as well. But it's really this like extended defense of, of that caregiving, not just motherhood, but caring for elders, caring for the sick, that this is not some burden that people unfortunately have to take on. This is one of life's most enriching experiences, intellectually, emotionally, spiritually.
Yes.
I recommend it really highly. It's a beautiful.
As do I. I blurbed it. I think it's a marvelous book. Yes, yes. And it's all part of this thing, that the things that were associated with women are downplayed. They're not serious, and that we don't bring our whole self to them, and it's, there's just to degrade it, to diminish it. And there is something now about this new generation of thinkers who were raised by such wonderful mothers.
Say that. I can't say that. Say
That's fine. That's so much better coming from me. But
go
yes.
ahead. Go ahead.
Well, exactly. Just because we were raised by these wonderful mothers, we didn't have to do all the same. We didn't have to do the same work.
We didn't have to keep reinventing.
We have to keep reinventing
the diaper. Yes,
we actually matter as human beings. We're like, yes, of course we matter as human beings. And another thing.
And so did our mothers. Yeah. And so do our mothers. Well, I think that's the hardest thing for a lot of people is once you're old enough to realize that your mother's a person separate from being your mother. That's also kind of maybe books like this help with that. I'm going to go ahead. Were you gonna say something about that? Or?
I was just agreeing heartily.
I like that. I was going to segue. I mean, I'm sure people ask you this all the time, but I can't resist. What is it like to be a mother and a daughter, both of whom write novels? Do you read each other's work in progress? Do you?
I read your work in progress. Nobody reads my work in.
I do not.
What? So, not
my progress.
You don't read my novels.
Oh, your novels.
Yes, my nonfiction. Yes.
That before.
Yes. No.
It's interesting.
Nobody.
I'm learning something new about our time.
Yeah.
Right. There you go. Everyone's a different writer and everyone's a different mother, just like you said.
Exactly. I have to just go into that space and nobody can come in until it's over. So yeah.
But it's I think it's a wonderful thing.
Oh, but what's so interesting is the way you would describe when I was writing a novel, when you were a little girl and you would come home into this atmosphere that had somehow changed because I would talk to you about it.
Yeah.
I would talk to you and yet has a sister who's a poet. And you should maybe I just remember you're sort of maybe you wrote about it somewhere that you
talk about an interview maybe, but that like I would come home often from school as a little girl and something had shifted in the house. There was some new atmosphere, there was some new something, and it would be because of something my mom was writing, and then she was sort of talking about it, and suddenly she'd be very sad, something sad had happened in the book, or she'd be very worried because for a character, and it's an interesting way to grow up because you grow up feeling very much that there's this reality to these fictional characters, these fictional worlds. And
we lived in this big old house and it was haunted with my character.
It was really haunted with her.
Interesting.
Better because every family is haunted, right? Every family is haunted by the ghosts of ancestors past. You were working with yours. You were doing something productive. You were sublimating it, trying to understand it. So in fact, it's like if you got to be haunted, and you do, what a lovely way to be haunted.
I like that. That's very interesting. So I'm going to thank you first. I'm going to thank you again after, because this is really a marvelous conversation. And I have so many other things I could ask you guys, but I have a lot of very interesting questions in the queue also, and I'm going to sort of go backwards on them. And this is a sort of one of the more straightforward ones. Do the authors have anything to say about the contrast in mothering a boy and mothering a girl?
So
You should ask.
so interesting. Yeah, so I have only mothered girls. Yes, I have grandmothered 2 boys now, but both my daughters have sons. So
And we're all here right now in the same house.
and what I think
Oh.
is, boy, mothering boys is very different from mothering girls. But yeah,
But
Yeah.
neither of you has mothered both. That's interesting.
Yeah, neither of us has mothered both.
No,
No, we've
Huh.
only each, and of course, like each individual child is so
It's so
different.
different,
But
yes.
but I would say that my sister and I were in some ways very, sort of very prototypical girls, and that we were more people pleasing and easier. And my Danielle was not.
it's not people.
You're right. Only I'm a people
Yes,
pleaser. You
that's
got to. But and we have very physical boys.
Yes.
I think every child is different, but on average, I have to say, as a mother of boys, there are definitely moments where I feel like people who've only mothered daughters think they're better mothers than we mothers of sons. We're like, oh, you try. You try someone who could like be a little Achilles.
Wait till adolescence, and then we'll see what you're going to say.
Say so, but I feel like Solly is going to give me a run for my money.
You have 2 boys. Rebecca has 2 girls. Okay.
Yes.
That's I have 2 of them. Yeah.
One boy.
Oh, and your sister has 1 boy. Okay, got it. So yeah, well, it's we'll just have to wait and see.
Exactly.
Here's another,
Sure.
Here's a question for it's more complicated than that. So here someone asks, did the stereotype of the Jewish mother get propagated by men who were the writers? Had daughters been given a voice, would there have been a different stereotype?
Great question.
Yes.
Just yes. I think the answer is just yes.
Really?
I think it's true that like when you think about like Philip Roth did a lot.
Yeah. I mean, that's true.
It's true. I don't
Really?
well, give me your answer and then I'll see what I think.
What's called the golden age of Jewish writing, the Saul Bellow, the Philip Roth, Malamed, they were men. Cynthia Ozick was sort of in there, and Grace Paley was sort of in there. The Jewish mother doesn't feature in that writing. I guess, and I come a little bit after. My Jewish mothers were, yes, I didn't make their mothering the main subject matter, but they were entirely different. They were trying to give their daughters free rein.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. And so, I had this novel called, which I think of as my most Jewish novel, Mazel.
Right.
And it starts out in a shtetl. And this mother has a very gifted daughter, Friedel, who's a free spirit. I mean, somebody, well, she could have been you, she could have been your sister, this was more your sister, I would say. Yes.
Right.
But
The one who becomes the actress.
no, but no, it's the sister who doesn't, the sister who dies. And then the mother gives the daughter who wants to be the actress complete free rein.
Oh, right. Okay.
Like she's allowed to go on to go on the stage. But it's and I think that's how my mothers always, I think in all of the literature, wherever there were mothers, they were mothers. Oh, except in the Mind Body Problem, because that was based a little bit on my own mother. But going on from there.
That's the daughter story that we alluded to earlier.
Going
Right.
on there, it was the mothers who wanted their daughters to live a different kind of life.
Yeah.
They did, and was trying to give them maximum freedom. So yeah, I do think that that it did come from the male rights, and I think specifically from Philip.
Yeah. I think you're probably, it's so hard to evaluate these counterfactuals. I think you're right. And the reason I was originally saying no was only because of, it's hard. because I could think of some examples, although for some reason I'm feeling very resistant to say, I feel like I'm throwing someone on the bus under the bus somehow by saying, giving them, but I can think of women who would sort of use those Jewish mother stereotypes. But I think that you're right, that it's sort of because the terms were set by the men.
The terms were.
And this was like, that's now what's serious, that's now what's right. And so then the women are sort of trying to, so I think that it probably, well, come down on the side.
But
Yeah.
you know,
It's an
it's
interesting
a good
question.
question. It's an excellent
So
question.
it's more to think about more, and I guess the task of separating from the mother is different too for a girl, and the mother's task in that dyad, especially you say these women who really wanted their daughters not to live the way they had lived, is pushing them in a way that doesn't come up for boys, right? Or maybe.
Oh, no, I mean, quite the contrary. I mean, mothers whose ambition has been thwarted, and so it's channeled through the son. It's, that's a stereotype as well in Jewish mothers. But for Jewish mothers, not just. Oh, never mind.
So here's another question, sort of another variation on this question, I guess. Traditionally, Jewish mothering involves invoking guilt to allow your adult child to have empathy, right? I'll just sit in the dark. Never mind me. I'll just sit here in the dark. But with millennials today, is this technique less effective due to changes in the generations? I thought that was a very interesting question.
Interesting question. There are such layers to that question.
Yeah.
This is a good crowd.
I mean, first of all, I want to start with that the reason we use the guilt is to instill empathy. I mean, I think that's such an interesting. I think there's I mean, maybe that's why we do it. I think that's one. I think there also when we use guilt, often it's I think often when we use guilt, it's also because we are feeling our own subjectivity put on hold. I think it's like, as a mother, you're sort of being asked to matter to yourself less. Suddenly this other person matters more. You have to put everything at the service of this child. It's an impossible task. It's a task that you have to continually try and fail at. And when the culture is also saying it's an easy task and one you should do happily, you just want to merge with your child and it's bliss, it becomes an even more difficult task. And then when you find yourself failing at it, you're angry at yourself. And I think a lot of the guilt comes from that. Now I'm speaking personally. I notice in moments where I'm trying to guilt my child, like, oh, just needs to go to the bathroom, like those kind of things. I'm like saying it because I'm like, I'm feeling not secure in my own rights to be an individual. And so then I'm trying to convince my kid, and so I think, and then maybe after the fact, we also think like, oh, well, it creates some empathy. But I have a feeling that's not where, at least in me, that's not where it originally comes from. It's more coming from this like, hey, to be a person. Right. And so I think, and I think it's not, I mean, I guess the question was like, how is it sitting with millennials? And I don't know, because I'm not a millennial, but nor are you.
Nor me.
We don't have any reference, so maybe someone from the audience has to answer. But I think even for me, like I don't like using guilt. I'll put it that way. I try very hard. I find myself doing it a lot. And I try really hard not to, because I don't think it's the right way to instill empathy. I actually think when we use guilt, then someone feels like they have to protect themselves from feeling their empathy for us. So like then it's like, or rather maybe the way to put it is it makes empathy zero sum. Guilt makes like it's like either I have to feel for you or I have to feel for me. But actually the task of a human being is to figure out how do I be me in relation to you? How do I toggle between my needs and your needs and take them both seriously? And I think using guilt is not the best way.
So interesting that you interpret, and maybe the questioner did as well, that you interpret the guilt as between that the child would feel guilty about the way they're treating the mother, whereas I had understood it as, oh, when they're playing with their peers, that when they're grabbing the toys out, and how would you feel if
that is so true.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So the mother feels guilty, you mean, not trying to make the child feel guilty, but the mother feels guilty about the child transgressions?
No. Just
Make the
But
child feel guilty
guilty.
about mistreating the friend.
The
Oh, I
friend-
see. Uh-huh.
It's his, how would you feel? Or when you're teasing your younger brother and all of this, how would you feel? This sort of thing. And just because of the notion of empathy being used there, I thought that
I think you're right.
yeah. And yes, I think we do still. I mean, do you
I mean, I wouldn't call that guilt. I think that's why I did it, but I think you're right.
But
And
you-
I'm being,
but it is, it's like you're trying to get the kid to see themselves a little bit in perspective.
yeah, no, you're
And,
right.
This would be good guilt. This would be good guilt, right?
Yeah.
In a way.
Guilt.
I mean, so
Remorse.
that you are
Well, our empathy,
that sort of thing,
Yeah.
and which is empathy.
which is in fact empathy. That's interesting. So maybe the questioner is linking these two things in a way I hadn't thought of. Or
Yeah, I like it. It's great.
yeah,
Wow,
that's
great.
interesting.
Great.
So
great
a
question.
segue to another interesting question. I think you alluded to this before, but this questioner asks if you read, I mean, you're a psychotherapist, so you probably do. Do you read any of the science of attachment theory, such as Mary Ainsworth or John Bowlby, to help explain what's going on in motherhood? Does that capture some of what you're?
I like attachment theory. I think I come from a psychoanalytic perspective, and which is really sort of the attachment theory grew out of sort of psychoanalysis, and Bowlby sort of separated out because it was a time. I'm about to get boring. It was a time when somehow psychoanalysis was not taking serious reality. They were only taking seriously children's fantasies, and so like
Right.
everything was in relation to a fantasy, not reality. And so Donald Winnicott and at the same time Bowlby were sort of saying like, hey, actually, we also have a real mother, and that actually happens. And so and so but then psychoanalysis, went back on the rails from my perspective, took reality back into account. And so now attachment theory is sort of within this much richer, what I find a much richer, broader, looser system. And for that, I mean, yes, I mean, that is how I think about motherhood. Is what I would call it object relations, which is one branch of psychoanalysis, but that attachment theory is very much a part of as well. That is how I think about motherhood. It's how I practice psychotherapy, and it was very much how I thought about the book in writing about motherhood.
It's interesting. I guess when the whole idea of, and I'll come back to the both of you, the whole idea of, the child figuring out that he's a different person from the mother and all that, I get that gets much more complicated when both the mother and the daughter are also writing fictional, are also writing books. It seems to me that's again, there are a lot more people involved.
Always a lot more people involved. I mean, I think, like that's, if you're taking attachment or object relations or anything seriously about how our psychologies work as interdependent beings, they're always, we're mothering with our own mothers in our mind, and that mother, and it's like the generations are mothering through, the ghost in the nursery is the way that this often gets described. This woman named Freyberg had come up with this term.
Selma Freyberg?
Selma Freyberg, yeah. She wrote this paper called The Ghosts in the Nursery. So it's like, there are always so many people. And so I think you're right that when we're working it out in fiction, well, you can read, you dip into each other's souls that way. You can see even more of what's.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Do you feel, I mean, knowing your mother better that way is I hear what you're saying, Rebecca, when Yael started writing novels, did you learn more about her than you had ever known?
Did I learn more about her than I had ever? No.
You knew it. That's cool.
I don't know. Perhaps I have to think about that more. I don't want to give a glib.
I perhaps that was too intrusive a question. I apologize if so.
But Yael, she always had an extraordinarily vivid imagination. I had been very against buying any Barbie dolls, being the feminist I was. And she broke me down with so much. And and we had the largest collection of Barbie dolls, because then I kept buying them for her because she would put on these plays, and they started to bring out the multicultural, the all sorts of ethnicities. And so that all got worked into the Barbie pageants that used to be put on. But, there were plots and there were subplots, and this was, and I, so I always knew you had a most extraordinary imagination. I remember even your father was once impressed when you said that you're make-believing, that's your make-believing. He said, that's second order make-believing. That's intellectually interesting. So yeah, so I mean, so then I saw it coming out in this disciplined and structured way, but I kind of always knew that was in you. But emotion, did things come out that I don't know? I'd have to think more about that. I don't know.
Okay. I will leave you with one last question. I know we're kind of wrapping. We have to wrap up, but this is sort of an interesting question. One of the questioners says, Yael, has it occurred to you that you've reached back thousands of years? I think it applies to both of you, really, that you've reached back thousands of years to rediscover themes from ancient peoples who worshipped fertility goddesses. It seems that they understood that motherhood was a powerful experience that harnesses strong forces of nature, and indeed one that frightens people then and now.
Yes, very much so. And in fact, I have one abandoned novel that was sort of like, everyone has to write their like first novel that's like a little too autobiographical, and then you learn how to write a novel. So I wrote a novel in college that was all about that. It was sort of like looking at all the ancient myths of like, the sort of the power of the feminine, of the mother, of the maternal. And so it's, yes, that's always very much in my mind. And I think not just sort of the, and I think that there's actually a lot of that woven into Jewish mythology as well. I mean, there's sort of like, I think that there's something about the way that, I mean, there are aspects in Jewish mythology that are less enamored of the strong woman, but the strong, powerful mother figure, and the power of the caretaker, shows up in a lot of different ways. So I think when we're looking for ways to like recast the Jewish mother stereotypes, we can mine from our own tradition very nicely.
And Rebecca, do you have anything to add to that? Because that's a nice note. If not,
Nothing.
Nothing. Well, thank you both so much for this lovely conversation. For one of the questioners, the book we were talking about before, which apparently doesn't come through in the chat, is Matrescence, Matrescence, by Lucy Jones. And there are lots more books that we've mentioned, and they'll all be in the chat. So thank you again to both of you, and I look forward to reading many more novels by both of you. And I'll go back to Suzanne.
Thank you, Rebecca, Yael, and Amy, for that wonderful conversation. Once again, I want to congratulate our Moment Magazine Karma Foundation Short Fiction Contest winners, Ralph Levinson, Talia Blatt, and Michael Orbach. You can find their full interviews and their short stories on Moment's website. Again, a special thank you to Sharon Karmazin and the Karma Foundation for their support of this contest. And please remember that submissions are due on November 1st for this year's contest. More information can be found on momentmag.com. And don't forget to visit Moment's shop page, where you can download the ebook Good Karma, a collection of some of the award-winning stories from previous years. Again, thank you again to all of our winners, special guests, and to all of you for joining us today. Thank you.